Well, welcome to the Scholarship Across the Disciplines panel. This is our first event of the year. The Scholarship Across the Disciplines is a committee that's part of the faculty or the collaborative. And our mission here is really to encourage engagement on the campus and stimulating intellectual conversation. We began this committee last year to achieve those goals, and we had a number of very successful events, and so we're really excited to present our first panel of the year. We will have a couple of more panels this semester, so we would invite you to come. And just so that you can get the dates in your head, we have October 5th. We'll have a panel at noon on the recession and the economics of the recession, so that should be a really stimulating and engaging conversation. And in November, we will be having a panel on social media and the internet, which I think should engage a lot of you students who probably use social media a lot. So we'll have 3 faculty talk about their research related to those topics. Our panel today, we have 3 speakers.
There he is.
We have, our first speaker will be David Cadden from the School of Business and the Department of Management, Professor of Management. He'll be followed by Tim Dansdill, who is Associate Professor of English, and our final speaker of the day will be Mordechai. Each speaker will have about 15 minutes, and at the end of all of the speakers, then we will open it up for questions and discussion. So please hold your comments and questions till after all the speakers have talked, and we encourage all questions and discussion. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to
I'm not here yet.
Cadden.
You sent us that weird message.
Cancel.
Cancel the message.
Thank you. Whoops, I'll get it.
Thank you, Nancy.
The topic of my presentation is there's nothing funny about humor. So let me start. 2 dwarfs walk into a brothel in Macau. Now, I would love to be able to finish that, but there's 2 reasons I'm not. One, I don't know the end of that joke. 40 years ago, a fellow student was telling me that on Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn, and we were interrupted by a domestic dispute that ended with a shooting. I've been waiting 40 years to hear the end of that joke. But even if I knew it, I wouldn't share it with you. Why? Because knowing the fellow who was telling me it was probably hilarious and utterly filthy. And one of the key things to talk about humor at work is the question of context. I take a look and I see a vast majority of the people here are students. I had anticipated it would be colleagues. So some of the humor may not fly in the same way that I would have hoped it would have worked with colleagues. So believe it or not, there are actually theories of humor. Personally, I find that a bit distasteful. Talk about taking the fun out of something. But in the context of some of the research that I'll be talking about, some of the backgrounds may be important. Plato and Aristotle talked about humor being centered around a notion of superiority. That if you feel superior, you're in a position to make fun of someone else or about someone else. And in some sense, slapstick humor, which I absolutely adore, is a good example of that. You're being able to see the schadenfreude of someone falling off a cliff and finding it amusing. Schopenhauer would talk about a discrepancy between expectation of the situation and outcome. And in fact, some of the modern theories of humor draw upon this heavily. And Freud has an insight, I don't know, again, how valid. Freud doesn't like his work to be exposed to empiricism. Centers on that forbidden thoughts and feelings can express themselves innocuously in the form of some jokes. So some of the modern theories is Suslov, who presents a computer model, arguing that humor stems from an information processing malfunction. all of a sudden we just don't get it, and then we do. Martinson developed an epistemic theory which says that you suddenly have a realization that the perception of the situation, the reality, there's a discrepancy. McGraw and Warren says that humor stems from a series of violations. And that's where the notion of context and the central theme of humor at work becomes important. Miller actually talked about humor as part of in an evolutionary context. He argued that it was beneficial for sexual selection, that women would select men who had a sense of humor because it was indicative of display of intelligence.
Not something else.
I have two views on that. Either I'm not very funny or this theory is wildly
Damn
wrong.
right.
Okay? When we take a look at humor, appreciating humor can be influenced by many factors. Age. Different types of humor vary across different stages. Not surprisingly, younger people tend to like silly humor. And when they say younger, they're going from 6 to 85 in this study. Okay?
Just let you use you know what.
Word humor seems to be better appreciated as you grow older. Gender, we'll return to that. Gender plays an extremely important role in determining what is funny, and particularly what is funny depending upon who's saying it with respect to gender. Sarglu and Sariat found the relationship between the type of humor and school motivation. Now, a little later on, we'll talk about types of humor, but let's just make it simple. Nasty humor, depreciating humor, seems to be appreciated by those students that have the least amount of motivation to do schoolwork. Culture. We'll be talking about organizational culture. We'll be talking about some examples of national culture. And in the globalization of the world, it becomes increasingly important for managers to be able to fully understand what a joke means and how it'll be interpreted by subordinates of superiors in different cultural settings. So I said that there are different types of humor. And Martin developed a humor-style questionnaire that many subsequent studies have adopted. Again, the notion that you're going to have a 5-point Likert scale to determine how funny you are and what you find funny is repellent to me, but nonetheless, as an empiricist, I have to take a look at it. Affiliative humor is non-threatening humor that reduces tension and brings people together. Aggressive humor, or negative humor as it's sometimes referred, focuses on demeaning, insulting, and ridiculing others. Many studies indicated that the more you love that, the more neurotic you are. Self-defeating humor, where you make yourself the joke, is positively related to anxiety and also hostility. So you're preempting the other swine from making fun of you by making fun of yourself. And self-enhancing is, I take an overall humorous view of life. One should note that there's a type of humor that's quite common, important to discuss in the context of work that's not up here, sexual humor. But let's just stay with this a while. So let's take a look at this. Some of the anecdotal, some of the papers that are, come in the business press, not good research papers like I'll be talking about, take a look at some of the benefits of humor. It improves employee satisfaction at work by making the workplace fun. It improves communication. It provides a pressure valve to release tension. It improves supervisor-subordinate relationship. Why? Because supervisors are viewed in this anecdotal approach as being what? Better managers if they are funny. And I think, ask any of the academics here how they view the validity of that. How often have you left a department meeting and said about the comments of your department chairperson, what a joke? How often have you left school meetings and turned around and asked the question about your dean, where did they get this clown? We'll take a look and see that the relationship between supervisor and subordinate and humor is a lot more complex than this would imply. And again, we'll come back to this as it reinforces cultural characteristics. So 3 areas that you seem to show up consistently in the literature about humor at work is power and leadership issues, group cohesiveness, communication, and culture. I talked before about context. So if we're going to take a look at context, we can take a look at it through these 4 prisms. 1, the initiator. Who's telling the joke? A joke will be funny depending upon who's telling it. The target, the person that the joke is directly being told to. The focus, or sometimes referred to as the butt of the joke. And the publics, which would be the audience beyond the initiator, the target, and the focus that'll be listening to it. So again, let's go back to the joke that I allegedly started with. With this audience, it'd be absolutely inappropriate to tell that type of joke. And good managers and good employees have to be aware of the context in which the humor will take place. So probably the biggest one that I'd like to talk about of those 3 dimensions is power, leadership, and humor. Any thorough understanding of leadership and humor should recognize the relationship between the level of humor and the outcome is not a direct path. Previously, we had said that a humorous supervisor is seen as a more effective supervisor. The large number of research studies, and I won't bore you with all of them, indicate that's not the truth. We have to take a look at who's the initiator, who's the target, who's the focus, what type of humor is being employed. Lundberg, going back to '69, found out that peers have more fun than higher level status leaders. Or at least that's what the higher level status leaders told people, okay? Low status butt of a joke didn't joke back if the initiator was of higher status. In other words, your boss can make fun of you, but the odds of you responding with a joke to them, well, I would argue that depends upon where you come from. I tend to find that people from New York and Brooklyn will basically throw their careers on the third rail in order to be able to get back. Or it may be even culturally determined, okay? There's a great line that the Irish will always jeopardize their own well-being for a good joke. And the example is Oscar Wilde. And when Oscar Wilde was on trial for homosexual acts in England, he was repeatedly asked by the prosecutor, did you or did you not repeatedly attempt to kiss the delivery boy of the champagne and the hors d'oeuvres? And Oscar Wilde responded, no. And as any good lawyer will tell you, shut up at that point. But Wilde went on with the additional line, no, he was far too unattractive for me to try to kiss. A third element of Lundberg's study is if peers are a butt of a joke were present, or if the initiator was of lower status, the joke isn't seen as funny. Kalani, Crawthords, and Miner, in a recent study, took a look at the issue of jokes and their impact in Arab cultures, particularly when they're dealing with US managers. And it's very clear in their study that cultural norms differ across borders, the idea of what's humor differs across border, and the type of joke that is used can have an impact on the way the leader is viewed. The use of self-defeating or self-enhancing humor was found to degrade the perceived effectiveness of the leader by members of businesses in Arab cultures. Vecchio, Justin, and Pierce found at a broad level in an educational setting, there's a positive relationship between the leader's humor and employee satisfaction. However, this is highly moderated by factors such as gender, perceived leader integrity, and contingent reward. In other words, the greater the contingent reward your leader can provide you, they suddenly become much funnier when they tell a joke. And the less they can provide you with, the less humorous we find them. So, One of the larger studies that recently came out took a look at the issue of humor between American male and female managers and their subordinates, and Chinese male and female managers and their subordinates. And they took a look at 3 areas: positive humor, sexual humor, and negative humor. And it looked as though everyone had a broad sense that if a supervisor is funny, that's good for the entire organization. However, they found that statistically significant results were in terms of differences between men and women, both in their likelihood of telling this type of humor or enjoying it. There was a statistically significant difference between sexual humor and negative humor. In fact, negative humor isn't viewed as humor in Chinese culture by both men and women. In America, negative humor was not a detriment to male supervisors, but was a severe detriment for women supervisors. In other words, you can insult your subordinates so long as you have a sufficient quantity of testosterone. Yeah. Global group cohesion. One of the arguments is that humor is good because it reduces ambiguity. What do they mean by that? Well, the more there is humor within the group, people begin to understand each other, but they also begin to understand limits. And that reduces ambiguity. It also enables, for group cohesion, you to explore the risky environment of your interactions with your supervisor. In other words, you may be more successful in making a joke about an idiotic decision of your supervisor rather than just saying, "You are an idiot." Good. Support peer finding the outsider. The more we joke about outsiders, the more we develop group cohesion. Okay? And it helps you define your position within the pack. We'll get to that. I'll speed this up. We've already seen that the cross-cultural studies have an impact. Art talked about, in developing organizational cultures, myths, metaphors, and humor. And I have to share with you what I hope is not an apocryphal story, because I love it. It's about Boeing Aircraft, the organization that I really wished I had worked for. Boeing was a company that obviously was dominated in terms of its top-level management by engineers. Several decades ago, they brought in a marketer. And the first thing the marketer did was, in a downturn of the economy, he started firing engineers in addition to production personnel. Well, most engineers could understand that, except for the fact that he dropped $100,000 on an executive bathroom in his own suite. And he also never missed a chance to invite people in to see his stall shower and extensive bathroom. Well, they were able to see in his day runner that he was bringing in some people. So they had a little joke. Unbeknownst to him, the people that he was bringing in were 4 of the top executives of airlines and his wife. And what was their little joke? They had placed a stripper in the shower. She came out au naturel and said, "Bobby, I didn't know we were having guests." Now, naturally, it's difficult to explain to your wife why you have a naked woman in your shower. And naturally, that CEO wanted to terminate the people involved. The 2 remaining years he was CEO, he hunted them down, and they were carefully protected and nurtured by Boeing. And the story became legend. It became myth. It occurred again a few years ago at Boeing. In other words, you're telling, if you're not a manager, if you're not an engineer, and you mess with us, we'll get you. Last thing, there has been a finding that indicates that some organizations ruthlessly adopt a Protestant ethic approach, which basically says if you're having fun, you can't be productive. I could go on, but the last thing I just want to say, and I'm sorry for going long, is that the last issue is harassment. Okay? Normally, we think of it in terms of sexual harassment, but it can also be a question of derogatory remarks and jokes directed towards someone's age and their race, also gender. So we've come to the recognition that not everything is funny at work. So we're back to context. And again, I apologize for going long. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it over to our next speaker.
Hi. I'm going to go in another direction, although I do have scholarly origins to what I do in the classroom. When I was a young man, a couple of years ago, I read Henri Bergson's, no, this is many years ago, Henri Bergson's On Laughter. If any of you, anyone out there ever read Henri Bergson's On Laughter? Oh my goodness, this is so great. It goes on and on and on laughter, and I failed to find a single statement in that learned tome that made me laugh. It is a killer. But he was a learned philosopher, and he did many important things about idée fixe and duration, but laughter, it was just awful. But I read it because I was searching for the answer of why people laugh. Because my father, 6'4", very powerful salesman, marketing type, who, if you've ever seen Mad Men, he was a madman. He was very much that type, very dashing, very aggressive, loved to tell jokes, won over customers by telling jokes, and also with a kind of physical intimidation because he was so big. So he'd get in there with a handshake when he was selling Jim Beam whiskey or Argus cameras. He sold a lot of different stuff. Every time he hit a big bonus, he would get offered a promotion, and on we moved across the country. So I moved 6 times from the time I was born in Texas to where we ended up in Connecticut. And so I had to take on sort of his salesman's pitch to adapt and survive in each new school, because the new school, the new kid in town is a tough subject position to be. Either you collapse into a kind of introversion or you become an extrovert. And I became an expert extrovert. I also picked up my father's, not so much his jokes, because his jokes were riddled with racism, sexism, scatology, all kinds of transgressive behaviors that just drove my Baptist mother, converted to a Catholic, into paroxysms of real sadness and grief. But she didn't divorce him because we all really thought these jokes were funny around the Sunday dinner table. I think that's one of the reasons why she kept the family together, because she realized that Jack was a problem, was going to hell, but he really was a funny man for an adolescent. So that's sort of my personal background, and so I carried my father's transgressive, deprecatory humor with me. And by the way, what my title is Vulnerable Teacher, Transgressive Teaching, Self-Deprecation for Promoting in Students Social Intelligence and Critical Thinking. That's probably just bullshit. I mean, I'm really not going to talk about that, except that deprecation is a really important word because it goes back to religious thinking. Imprecation is to bring down a curse upon someone. Deprecation, imprecation is related to prayer. And so a deprecation is really to call down a prayer to help someone escape from a particularly troublesome or even evil situation. And I have to tell you, without getting into detail, I had to use humor as a survival mechanism because my father was a madman. He really was a madman, and I needed humor in order for myself to psychically survive. Enough said about that. Though I do share large parts of my personal life with my students. I have the luxury of doing that because I teach something called literature and creative writing and argumentative writing. So unlike, say, a teacher of chemistry or even business, well, maybe business, you can get into personal anecdotes. But you know, I managed to teach the stuff. Literature is the reflection of our own lives. So, for example, I teach an English senior seminar on the theory and practice of love, sex, and death. I mean, and I have practiced love, sex, and was almost killed by my father. So I find these things very, very important to relate to students, and so I bring my personal life into those contexts. Essentially, I come to my students as a vulnerable thinker and a vulnerable emotional man who managed to build up his self-esteem over time through humor and just sheer guts, frankly. The idea of tearing myself down in front of my students has less to do with Freud, and I want to pick up a little bit on what David Cadden said about Freud. Freud's Jokes in the Unconscious it still remains a terribly important book in the very complicated subject of humor and laughter, which I think my colleague Mordechai Gordon has captured very, very nicely as an overview of where humor comes from and what it's meant for. And David gave you some of that background too when he mentions Freud. But Freud really believed that we have such powerful sensors in the structure of our psychic life that whether or not you believe in the id, the ego, and the superego, which kind of really just replaces Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Where's Mom? I don't know. But that if we have those sensors to control that upsurge of this material that would otherwise overwhelm us sexually or aggressively, then every once in a while when we have a really crazy dream, we say, wow, that was amazing. I really want that to be in my waking life. Sometimes we don't. But if there's a little bit of an upsurge of that energy, Freud says we generally, our sensors, our internal sensors say, don't say it, don't do it, don't go there. Well, I do go there. I just go there in my classroom. But under academic freedom, sometimes I skate along the edge, and that's called transgression. Is what I'm doing in my class with my students under academic freedom policy appropriate to what I'm teaching? And I'm always ready to say, if somebody calls me on the carpet or wants to fire me, yes, because I'm teaching this. I'm teaching the sexual life of George Eliot. I mean, I'm free and clear. So that's sort of my background in the notion of being a vulnerable man in a vulnerable position who's decided to survive in his personal life and his professional life by transgressing boundaries between teacher and student, between the personal and the literary, on and on. That's my, I wouldn't call it a hallmark, I'm not proud of it. It just comes out of me. It just comes out of me, and it does shock my students. It doesn't shock me, it's just, one student famously said, Professor, it's almost as if you are a walking professor of the Tourette syndrome. And so it just pours out of me, and if Freud is right, then I have a very tenuous or porous membrane between my unconscious, or at least my subconscious, and my waking conscious life. How much time? 8 minutes. And you could smoke a cigarette and do all kinds of things in here. Let's see. So let's just let me show you, rather than preach to you, I gave you a little bit of Bergson. Don't read Bergson. Well, actually, some people may, during Q&A, say, oh, Timothy, not true, not true. Bergson's very important for understanding the philosophy of laughter. And I love philosophy. But Freud, read that Freud. If you read, there's lots of Freud to read. I'm teaching a lot of Freud this semester to my English senior seminar students. But that's the one I started with because I was so interested in jokes and the jokes my father told. By the way, he would bring home an entire trove of the dirtiest jokes I've ever heard from his physician. His physician, he wouldn't see his physician twice, 3 times a year. I think more just to get more jokes because his physician would tell him all these jokes. He'd bring them home and tell them to me. But I'm not a joke teller. I decided that I always am looking for a situation in order to intervene with a transgressive moment. My wife used to like it, and I was very sexually attracted to her then, and she was to me, and now she doesn't laugh so much anymore, and you can fill in the rest. But my daughters think it's hilarious that I tell sexual jokes and other kinds of jokes. But I do want to share with you some of the sources and play a few clips of stuff that I used to look at that made me realize my dad is not the only funny, transgressive person in the world. I want to play, we don't have time to play all of these. Lenny Bruce was very, very important to me when I was young because he was and by the way, I think out of all the comics, if you had to profile them, Jewish comedians are the funniest. And to go back to Freud's notion, and this is a little too complicated, so I don't want to turn it into a learned lecture, it's because of the suffering, partly is the suffering and the cruelty, because Freud believed that most humor was meant to injure. It has a cruel direction. So I really, really love Jewish comics, and I really love Mordechai, but he's not a comedian. See, he laughs at everything I say. That's what I love about Mordechai. So I was going to start with Lenny Bruce, but we don't have enough time, and instead I just thought I'd go to somebody who absolutely flabbergasted me when I was a young man. So let's just see if we can get this up and have it running. And
Put it on full screen.
volume, let's see.
Behind you, there's a control.
Right.
It's loading.
Yeah, let's see. Here, maybe this will help.
I have no respect. Under no respect. No respect at all. You kidding? I was drowning. I was yelling, help, help. The lifeguard ran over. So I'm like, buddy, keep it down. Keep it down. I get no respect from anyone. When I called up suicide prevention, they're trying to talk me into it.
Not so funny, but when you watch enough of it, basically I learned early on that if you want to get respect, one way to do it is, when you're a new kid in town, is to find out what's funny in a particular group and just basically track it, mimic it, and I became a very good mimic and very adaptive. That's how I got respect, aside from getting into a lot of fistfights. Is this funny? I wonder if this is funny. A lot of people think this is funny.
In the past few weeks, through our national hotline, we have collected hundreds of names of suspected terrorists, and I'm proud to say that most of these calls have come from high school and college students nationwide. In fact, we received over 475 calls alone regarding this man. My balls is We also received calls regarding such nefarious terrorists as Grabber Booby and Haida Salami. Let this be a message to you, Haida Salami. We will not play your dangerous game. We are also currently searching for a man we believe to be an Al-Qaeda lieutenant who's been farting his cousin. I've been farting. And their close companion, Ajit Madror.
Is there a way to identify who's been farting?
Our operatives have picked up his scent. Also, according to our intelligence, he is targeting gas refineries and fertilizer plants, and oddly enough, baked bean canneries. He's a silent but deadly killer.
Hey, what can you tell us about Ajit Madror?
We're told that when he was fleeing the scene of his last attack, he left skid marks.
So I would have found that funny, scatological humor, etc., when I was a young man. But when you put it into a political context and give the sensitivity of where we are, obviously a lot of people were laughing or in that audience. I don't find that funny at all. But then again, what's funny? This has become a subject for me of intense interest because I can't believe it, but I turned out to be featured in Mordechai Gordon's very learned paper of an example of a teacher who uses humor and knows how to laugh at himself. thus the self-deprecation part. And he calls me Professor D in this paper. But because of that paper and because of Mordechai's careful scholarship, the only scholarship I can really claim on this was my dissertation. I wrote on anonymous writing, trying to get students to say exactly what they felt about being sexed, gendered, classed, raced. And some of it was really, really funny, and most of it shocking. But basically, the only claim I have to telling you today that what's funny is worthy of academic study, and also worthy of trying to figure out your relationship to your professor and vice versa, is that it sort of goes back to what David said. If there's no laughter in the classroom, there is something wrong. There is something terribly wrong. Because I think the Learning Teaching Act has to be enlivened with some release of, if not unconscious energies, some of the subconscious stuff that lies, if not in the course content itself, in the interaction of a so-called expert who's dedicated his or her life to giving you new knowledge, and your reception of that as a co-creator of that knowledge. And if you can't laugh together at a certain point, then something's wrong with the educational project. So I'm in his paper, and in reading the entire piece, not the piece about me, per se, but I am proposing to my department next year probably started a 200 level course, humor and laughter in literature. And I hope to offer it to you, coming at you, next fall or next spring. So I'm done.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Mordechai Gordon, a professor in the School of Education, and I want to share with you some thoughts about a course that I introduced to this university last fall, Philosophy of Humor and Laughter course, 300 level elective, and it came out of a few years of research and being very interested in humor, and writing some stuff and featuring Tim in one of my articles called Learning to Laugh at Ourselves. And I thank Tim for all the great material that he has provided me over the years. But basically,
Aw, shucks.
but in this course, we dealt with the major theories of humor that David talked about. And and basically every class, in every meeting, I usually opened up with a couple, a video clip or two of some stand-up comedians doing humor that in some ways were related to the concepts, the theories, the ideas that we were discussing that day. And then asked the students to reflect on these clips. Ask them, for example, what made this clip funny in your opinion? Yeah. Do I need to do? Sorry. Okay. Good. Here we go.
There you go.
What made the clip funny? What kind of humor is being portrayed? Who is the comedian making fun of? And questions like this, can you relate it to any of the theories that we read for today? And so that kind of prompted discussion. And I want to begin by sharing with you a couple of examples of clips that I've used, and then talk to you about some survey results that I administered at the end of the semester to assess the impact of these clips on students' understanding of the content, ability to participate in the discussion, and critical thinking skills. All right, so let me begin with a couple of examples, and hopefully they'll be new.
So I don't want to go to the restaurants my friends want me to go, and I don't want their phone. Everybody I know wants, you should get my phone. Why don't you get that? What kind of phone do you have? You should have this phone. and all my pretentious show business friends with their iPhone. This, I'm so sick of this. Okay, I get it. Can you do this with your phone? No, I can't. I take my phone, I do that with it, okay? That's what I got. So my wife is on the BlackBerry now. Oh, the BlackBerry people, yes, I know you're here. Yes. I'm surprised you're even paying attention to this. They pay attention to nothing. They walk around holding the BlackBerry because that is what BlackBerry commands them to do. You keep me out. I want to see what's going on. And you try and talk. You notice their eyes are just like, they're like wooden doll eyes, or they just... And they're always, you're trying to talk to them, but they're not really there. Or they do that creepy head down thing on you. Uh-huh. What is that? Do we even know what rudeness is in this culture anymore? Could I just pick up a magazine, hold it in front of your face, and read it while you're talking? Is that what we're doing now? So anyway, so she gets the BlackBerry, she uses it in the car, brings it in the house. The other night I found it in the bed. She was gone, me and the BlackBerry. I tried to smother it with another pillow, but it doesn't use oxygen. A couple of days later, she found it in the bottom of a bowl of yogurt. Oh, it said BlackBerry. I guess I got confused. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's number one, and here's the second one.
Fortunately for comedians, and only for comedians, Glenn Beck keeps bringing the stupid. So as a public service for the increasingly smaller number who take Mr. Beck seriously, here is Louis Black on Glenn Beck.
Arizona's new immigration law has a lot of people outraged. Some people more than others.
Some have likened having to carry papers around to Nazi Germany.
Oh, that's a little bit of a hyperbole to compare Arizona to Nazi Germany. First of all, Nazi Germany had a much nicer climate. But now all this outrage has people outraged at the outrage.
You're out of your mind. Are you comparing the systematic, cold-blooded extermination of millions of Jews to America making sure that people are here legally? Arizona sure is putting the AZ in Nazi, aren't they?
Oh, didn't think it was going to be him, did ya? Glenn Beck is offended. Glenn Beck thinks playing the Nazi card is going too far. Glenn Beck! This is a guy who uses more swastika props and video of the Nuremberg rallies than the History Channel. For God's sake! For God's sake! He compared global warming to Nazi Germany.
That was Hitler's plan. His enemy, the Jew. Al Gore's enemy, the UN's enemy, global warming. I'm not accusing Al Gore of being a Nazi or anything like that.
Yes, you are! You just did it! Note to Glenn Beck. I've met Al Gore. Al Gore is no Adolf Hitler. Hitler had charisma. All Glenn Beck needs is a single word to send him into a Nazi tizzy, especially when it comes from President Obama talking about his Supreme Court justice.
I view that quality of empathy, of understanding and identifying with people's hopes and struggles as an essential ingredient for arriving at just decisions and outcomes.
Did you catch it? Neither did I. But guess who did?
Hitler decided that It was the only empathetic thing to do, is to put this child down and put him out of his suffering. It was the beginning of the T4, which led to genocide everywhere. It was the beginning of it. Empathy leads you to very bad decisions many times.
In one paragraph, Glenn Beck tied one of the most positive words in the English language to Hitler's genocide. It's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, except there's just 1 degree, and Kevin Bacon is Hitler. Oh, can I play? Let's see. Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa had a mustache. Hitler had a mustache. Mother Teresa is Hitler. This is easy. And it works for anything. The National Endowment for the Arts.
Advocating through art is known as propaganda. You should look up the name Goebbels.
Teaching kids about climate change.
Some may believe we're on the road to the Hitler Youth.
Acorn.
These are the brown shirts.
TARP.
It's what happened in the National Socialist country of Germany in the 1930s under Hitler.
The Peace Corps. Seriously, the Peace Corps.
This is what Hitler did with the SS.
Glenn Beck has Nazi Tourette's. My goodness, this is delicious. Hitler! That's a lovely tie you're wearing, John.
Well, thank you very much.
Goebbels! I'll give Glenn Beck this. He's got style. He can even make a paranoid Nazi comparison using poetry.
You ever heard the old poem, first they came for the Jews? Well, first they came for the banks, then it was the insurance companies, then it was the car companies.
Glenn, get a grip. There's a difference. They came for the Jews to kill them. They came for the banks and the car companies to give them $700 billion. If that's coming for them, then come for me. Hell, for $700 billion, I'll go to you. Unless it's not me they're after. Gee, I wonder who they could be after.
First they came for the Jews and I stayed silent. Next, I'll show you the very latest attacks on me.
Yes. Glenn, the Nazis are everywhere. And you're not safe. So here's what you do, and take it from me. My people have been through this before. First, you got to find an attic. Then hide there for the next 3 years. And whatever you do, don't make a sound. We'll let you know when it's safe to come out.
Thank you. All right, so these are just 2 of many examples of clips that I've shown in my class. And at the end of the semester, I administered a joint quantitative qualitative survey that had 6 questions that were both numerical and open-ended. For example, analyzing the video clips helped me better understand the theories, was 1. The video clips increased my interest in participating in class discussion, 2. And the third one that I want to share is watching and analyzing the clips enhanced my critical thinking skills. So here, and then I collected the surveys and analyzed the data. So 83% of the respondents reported that analyzing the video clips helped them better understand the theories that we studied. In response to the statement, one student wrote that after learning the theories, it was easy to label the types of humor in the videos. A number of people wrote in response to the same statement that the video clips added a different dimension that enhanced their understanding of the theories. For instance, one student noted that, quote, I learned from visual examples and oftentimes simply talking about the theory did not make sense to me. But after viewing the clips, the theories became more understandable. Another student wrote, I'm an audio-visual learner. It sunk in when we watched the clips, and discussing all our answers as a class really helped me to solidify the specific theory we will learn, analyze. These comments clearly suggest that the video clips help many students visualize and make connections to the theories learned. My own reflections, as well as the results of the midterm bench that in which they had to choose a video clip and analyze it, showed that finding and watching and analyzing the video clips improved students' understanding of the humor theories covered and content of the course in general. Then, for the second question, again, 83% of the class noted that the video clips increased their interest in participating in class discussion. One student who agreed with the statement noted that I feel that it acted as another talking point I could raise in discussion. Another student who gave a positive rating explained there was no right or wrong. We all got to speak our mind and analyze. Other students talked about how the video clips made the class more interesting and amusing, inspiring them to want to share their opinions and help them feed the discussion. These results confirm my belief that watching and analyzing the video clips helped at least some students who were confused or intimidated by the theories we read to become more vocal in our class discussions. As one student wrote in the survey, the video clips helped a little because I was relaxed and felt more comfortable. The third question that I want to share with you about critical thinking skill, 75% of the participants in the survey either agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that watching and analyzing the video clips enhanced their critical thinking skills. In response to this statement, one student noted on the survey that, quote, analyzing the video clips made me think about humor in a new way and helped me take a different approach. A number of students commented on how the humorous clips forced them to think differently and more deeply about the readings. Summarizing this statement, one student wrote that it made me think a lot more and have to relate what I read to what I was watching with no real help. Although this student may have been frustrated that I never told the class in advance how the clips were related to the readings, he or she clearly recognized that the clips and the discussion that followed helped the students think deeper and more critically. Yeah, one last paragraph.
No.
Taken as a whole, the results of this survey suggest that there's a positive correlation between the use of humorous clips and my students' understanding of the content, engagement in the lessons, and ability to think critically. Both the quantitative and qualitative results of the survey, as well as my own reflections on this course, indicate that watching and analyzing the humorous clips provided the students with a very valuable perspective that illuminated the ideas that we read. That is, the humorous clips added a visual and auditory dimension to this course that enhanced their ability to make sense of the theories we discussed. My findings also suggest that this added dimension encouraged many students to participate more in the class discussion and help them to think deeper and more critically about the text we read. Simply put, watching and analyzing the humorous clips helped many students make connections to the content of the lessons and their own lives that would not have been possible without this aspect of the course. It is significant to remember, and one more, this personal connection, when I showed them the Jerry Seinfeld clip about the black, and so we had this discussion about who is being made fun of, and so why is this funny? So some students said, well, it's the superiority theory that David mentioned, or that the presentation is so comical. At the end of the discussion, one student raised his hand and said, well, when he's making fun of his wife, he's really making fun of us. The viewers. And so I sensed that this student was able to make a personal connection with this kind of clip and maybe kind of forced him to reevaluate some of his habits. So I'll leave it at that and be glad to answer questions if there are.
How does it work? Only Mordechai is going to answer questions, by the way. Sure. Please, students, ask questions. That's why you're here.
The quality of a student should be determined not by their answers, but by the quality of the questions that they pose.
What a wonderful variation on Martin Luther King's content of character or color, David. Oh, good. Oh, even though you're not a student, I still love you.
I'm curious at the humor education class, did you have them watch the clips all together in class, or did they watch them individually, like through Blackboard or whatever?
So did they watch in class or next to their BlackBerries in their comfort zones?
No, it was as a class. We watched it. The beginning, usually at the beginning of class, I projected it just like I did here, and watched it together, and then asked some questions about, and had a discussion about what this meant. Why was this funny? If they thought it was funny. In some cases, I chose clips that students didn't even think were that funny. So, which goes back to David's point about context and who the audience is, and really, humor is something that some people think is entirely relative, that is very hard to translate from one culture to another, or from one group to another. So we always need to keep that in mind. Although I had a student disagree with me on when I taught on Monday, when I said that humor is very context specific, she raised her hand and said, well, what about things like when somebody falls down, slips clumsily, like on a banana peel or something? Isn't that something that everybody can relate to? So perhaps there's some, maybe I'll open it up to David. There's some humor like Charlie Chaplin kind of humor that is less specific. Yeah.
Well, again, I have a great deal of discomfort talking about philosophy and humor at a couple of levels, and therefore trying to analyze it to that. My background's engineering, so I do have a tendency to like to have empirical results and analyze. But, in some sense, I'm sort of like the Burgermeister in the old Frankenstein movies that tell Dr. Frankenstein there are some things men are not meant to know. It's sort of like an engineer trying to flowchart sex. It may flow chart. Here's how you do it. Go through this step. If this doesn't work, then restep this thing. So I think that you may find that that the Freudian model, that there are some things that we don't want to say that tend to be humorous. But again, I'm not quite sure of that, because I've attempted to illustrate concepts in manufacturing through Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. And where you have the scene where he's sucked through the machine, where he's fed by the automatic feeding machine to improve efficiency, I think was very funny, and it died like a dog in the glass. You guys just sat there. So I think sometimes there are items that are probably universally funny. The only thing I've ever heard that seems to be from anthropologists that seems to be universal is the 0.7 ratio with respect to men and women. That the ratio of the waist to the hips, if it's 0.7, seems to be the ideal ratio that's found attractive across all cultures. The size of the woman might be significantly different across cultures. I think probably there were a few items in humor that are like that.
Interesting.
And again, probably related to pain.
Well, I have no idea what in the hell you want me to say. So I won't. I mean, I know what I'd like to say, but how about another question? I really like that flow chart, though.
Yes. You seem to have
If you want to improvise it.
irreverent sense of humor, kind of like I probably do. And
What's your name?
My name's Tom Cadden from the PA program, and I've tried to incorporate humor into some of my presentations, and have had it backfire a few times on me in terms of somebody in the crowd getting offended, and then it comes back on your evaluations and stuff. Have you ever had to handle that, or is there?
Yes. I mean, to put it in the most generalized terms, my dean, early in my career here, called me in and said, Tim, you're a very popular teacher, and you're obviously quite rigorous in your demands apparently you assign the students quite a bit of reading and writing and hold their feet to the fire on that, but you might tone it down a bit. I said, what do you mean, tone what down? And he said, oh, come on. You know what I'm talking about. And I said, no, well, tell me. I mean, because what you're talking about, what I talk about, there may be a vast discrepancy. In other words, I continue the provocation, even with the authority figures who hold my fate in their hands. And I try to encourage my students to do the same. And it's a rare student who will actually finally figure it out that their grade is not being held in some zone because I've shocked them, or that somehow they're not permitted to shock me. I always put my class in a circle. We always have course content generally that is either funny or shocking, or at least start to plummet down through the superego, through the ego, down into those id areas and back up. That's the flow chart that I operate in pedagogically. It has backfired, but finally the dean and I worked out this, that if I violated academic freedom, let me know about it, and I'll take it, into adjudication. But to ask me to tone my transgressive teaching style down is to ask me to stop breathing. I went on and got tenure, but maybe they just felt sorry for me. What else? Oh, just one piece is that idea about backfiring. I think, particularly a PA, there's all kinds of stuff on the web that you can use in a humorous way to get into the very dry stuff of bones and tendons and all that, right? I think.
Yeah.
One question for more, one for Tim, and one for all of you, so I'll do it really
Okay.
fast. Well, I was wondering, these questionnaires to students about the clips, I was thinking that there's nothing you asked that I wouldn't have asked in other classes concerning video clips, not necessarily about humor. Does it help? Does it make us feel better? Are we more relaxed? So what is specifically to do with humor there in that question? Tim, you said something very general. You said, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that any class on any subject could do well with humor jokes. Now that might be psychologically true, that the students are going to feel better. And I'm not one to say that anything is immune to humor. I think you can joke about anything, Nazis, whatever you want. But I'm wondering, in a class where I'm talking about torture and human rights, is it going to help to put the humor there, or is it going to make them, me, anybody around here, feel inappropriate? And I do take inappropriateness as an ethical term. And for all of you, I really do want to ask you, don't you think it sort of ruins humor when we talk about it so theoretically, when we try either empirically to ask about it or conceptually to ask about it? Doesn't it sort of take out the humor? The whole point about humor is that, well, put it differently, I think I'm absolutely humorless, and every time I ask somebody to explain a joke to me, they say, well, if I explain it to you, I've killed the joke. So I think if we're talking about humor, we're sort of killing the humor, unless we want to be really teachers, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think your last question pretty much encapsulates the other two. I know there's a specific piece about Mordechai's use of video, but I did say that I think I was really talking about the role of the teacher, and it's in my title, and it's a very important book, at least one chapter, that deeply affected me when I started my teaching career, by Bell Hooks, great black feminist, activist. And her book, Teaching to Transgress, that particular chapter, she talks about how teachers, particularly professors, have been trained to effectively completely bifurcate their personal lives and really just, in effect, present themselves as pure mind, as if they have no body, no sexual functions, no sufferings, no dark moments. And so I guess it's from that I'm really operating. But I'm lucky to be in rhetoric and composition, where I can really have the subject matter of the unconscious always pressuring underneath the waking state of what we're here to do, supposedly, which is create new knowledge. So I'm not saying that chemistry could perhaps do it, but I suppose what I was pointing to is that I think we're all talking about faculty development more and more here at this university, and moving from an instruction paradigm to a learning paradigm. All I would suggest is that an instruction paradigm with the worst kinds of lectures kills not just humor, it kills the ability for students to actually take that learning and make it active in their own lives. The learning paradigm, as I interpret it, that John Tagg came here and talked about in a very, very sophomoric book, but that's another matter, is that we need to learn how to laugh or be willing to talk about moments that surprised us or shocked us in what we're learning. And I think that could apply even to chemistry or engineering in the guise of our faculty being trained to say, what is unclear to you? What do you really do not understand? Because that goes back to a Socratic moment. And I think there's possible humor in that, but I think our faculty need to be trained in how to do that. So it starts with a more openness to the interaction between professor and student, the professor as an embodied individual who's hanging on every word and will take a moment to say, did you just say that? And have a little conversation and then get back to the negotiation. That's very complicated. I just do it. It's just part of me. I'm not suggesting we can train introverted teachers to become extroverted. But I do think that we're missing something in the MAT program as well. And I think that's why he's trying to get a course about how can we make our classrooms more and more the facsimile of what we're doing outside the classroom. I think we're all laughing our asses off. For some reason, we can't do it in the classroom because of this mind-body split in the transmission of knowledge traditionally.
Can I just go back to that just for 1 second? I agree with that whole learning thing. It's that maybe my engagement with life instead of laughing is weakened. So I'll share that with them rather than with you.
Yes.
In the sense of talking about torture, there's a book I came across about 25 years ago, The Cultural History of Nazi Germany. And there was a chapter in it. Before I get to that chapter, interestingly enough, who voted? What group of people voted most for Hitler in 1933? Teachers. Yes, it started me off. There's a chapter in it, Humor in the Third Reich. And it recounts a study that indicated that almost all of the best jokes appeared to have emanated from concentration camps. So even in horror, some of them were in the Christmas season of 1944, people would spray paint on walls, be practical, buy a coffin as a gift. They had one joke where a Gestapo officer in one of the camps puts a gun on an elderly Jewish man and says, I'll blow your brains out if you can't answer the following question. I lost an eye on the Russian front, but I had the finest German craftsman create a glass eye for me. Which one is it? And he looks up and says, it's obviously the left eye. The German holsters his gun in irritation. He said, how could you tell? Well, it was the one that had the kindly glint to it. So even in horrors, I think you can. But unlike some people's experience, I've learned to throttle down, having been brought in and having been told perhaps I need therapy. And again, in the context, my best friend suggested I should have asked the question, do you mean anger management therapy? And if the answer had been yes, to jump across the desk and pummel the dean to a piece. And he said, here's what will happen. You'll do 6 months in the nut house. They can't fire you because it's a medical problem, but when you come back in the next semester and walk down that hall, see if you have any problems with students, colleagues, or the administration. Everything, I think, is context.
Yeah, absolutely.
No.
On that, regarding your first question, I agree with the videos that other professors use in different contexts. I didn't get to that in my paper because I didn't have time, but the key is doing it in context as part of a discussion and that's why in my case in a course on philosophy of humor and laughter it makes sense to show humorous clips. In other cases it might it makes sense to show completely different clips. But the key is to show it as a way of getting students to engage in a discussion and reflection on the content, on the ideas that you want to get across. The other question that you have, I kind of disagree with you, and I'll explain why. It's true that when you explain a joke, you ruin it many times, but first of all, humor is much broader than jokes, and humor is for me, it's a very legitimate topic, not only of discussion but also of scholarly research. Just like fallacies, and you're a philosopher. Fallacies is considered to commit a fallacy is the biggest mistake in philosophy. But fallacies is a big topic of research in philosophy, logical fallacies and other kinds of fallacies. So the same way for generations,
and they're funny too.
Yeah, for generations, humor was not considered a legitimate topic in philosophy because. Philosophy was considered a serious discourse, and humor is something funny. And so, how can you have a philosophical debate about something that's not serious? Well, now we know that that's not the correct way to think about this. So, I think that there's a difference between explaining a joke and talking about humor in general as an interesting kind of human kind of phenomenon. And you can look at it anthropologically, you can look at it psychologically, as David sometimes, you can look at it philosophically, you can look at it from multiple disciplines. That's part of what this panel is about, an interdisciplinary kind of treatment of humor.
And I would say that, as you well know, Anat, and we all know, I've watched or experienced in my youth, and I really wish it would happen more often as I age, but I see it happening with my children. One of the reasons I think we might have children is to relive the childhood of watching somebody begin in laughter and end up crying. So just the line between what comes out, the actual release of energy and the relief in laughing really, really hard to the point that you lose control and you're actually weeping. Is it the nature of the joke, or it's the situation? And, not to be overtly Freudian, but people need to laugh sometimes in order to let out repressed elements that otherwise would have them weeping all the time. I mean, there's just, it's one man's laughter is another woman's weeping, and vice versa. I've seen it over and over again, particularly with my wife.
There's a sorry.
It's quite quick, I think. I just wanted to ask you if I'm really used to humour in the classroom. I already have one strike against me because I'm British and culturally very different sense of humour. Irreverent, I would sort of, it's irreverent, dry, it's much less obvious. And I have on occasions had to say to the students, that was a joke. And at that point, I'll laugh. But the other thing, I'm wondering, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten your name, probably a question to the gentleman. David.
I can go on Monty Python skit.
No,
I actually have that up.
I know I'm not there, Monty Python. Monty Python, by the way, it's British Monty Python. But I'm wondering how much of a strike it is against me that I'm female, because I strongly suspect that they don't expect, so they don't think I'm going to be. I can't be making a joke because I'm a woman.
My wife is a professor, so I'm a bit attuned to the roles that occur. And I've done some research on the use of student evaluation instruments, and gender plays a tremendous role in the way you're evaluated. In addition to that, there seems to be some evidence with respect to professors that if you have age and you also throw in perceived attractiveness, it has a huge impact on the score you receive in the student evaluation instrument. So I would imagine the same thing occurs with humor. A number of the female comedians, as opposed to a male comedian, would basically say that many of the attractive women have a very difficult time. That the old notion was, in order to be funny and be a woman, you had to be less than attractive. So I think there is a tremendous impact of gender in terms of cracking a joke in the class, particularly when you throw in the authority and subordinate position.
I have a question for you. Do you like Silverman? I'm
Sarah
forgetting her first name.
Sarah Silverman.
Sarah Silverman? She's quite attractive.
You know, I haven't seen much of her stuff. The issue with some of these programs is I don't always get cultural references. You know, I started off with Jon Stewart, and for a while it was all completely lost on me. I've been here for 4 years now, and I laugh at about sort of 50% to 2/3 of it. So I think sometimes it's not necessarily whether I would appreciate their sense of humour or their mode of delivery or their type of humour. It's more that I just don't always get the people that they're talking about, so it's not necessarily a fair assessment that I'm making.
Did you have any feeling that Professor Cadden was hitting on you?
But I did not, now he has a very dry presentation, and I thought that was very British. You could have easily been Ricky Gervais.
But just to add to your point about being here 4 years and a half, I'm finding that there's a generational divide now between me and my students in terms of the things that I find funny versus, because I have them do, for the midterm, they choose a clip that they find funny and they analyze it, send me the URL. And many of the things that and then they present it in class, many of the things I don't even laugh one time. So, and I'm sure it's vice versa. So again, it's the culture specificity of humor and jokes that we need to keep in mind. I think there are some things that might be a little bit more general that David mentioned, but in general, humor, I'm sure that if some of us were to watch British humor, we wouldn't get, because of the cultural references, we wouldn't get half the jokes.
I think an interesting thing for we'll just say for your course would be to get students to watch The Office, which is an American, there's the British Office and the American Office, the same route. Very, very different.
Much funnier British.
Different, like apples and oranges, I would say.
When you're as old as I am and you go back to Sanford and Son, which was a takeoff of, was it Stilto and Son?
Oh, okay.
Okay, and a very different play on it in terms of the way the humor. So you do see significant differences when we tend to expropriate series from other countries.
And just a general comment, dovetailing off of what Paul said, it seems too that humor is a measure of health in a way, the individual and even a nation. When we think that a country can poke fun at itself, laugh at itself, whether it's in print or in film, that's really something very healthy. That critical ability, but also to laugh at mistakes, foibles, big and small.
Which brings you to the field of satire.
Yes.
And the sense of how ready is a society to be able to accept in a broad scale satire. And where do they draw the limits on satire, where it's, that joke's funny, but that's really offensive. And that becomes a very important issue at work, particularly in light of jokes being viewed as a form of harassment. Where do you begin to self-censor yourself, and at what point may you have so censured yourself that you're no longer funny, or you keep it inside?
It reminds me your comment of politics and Donald Trump, that's always threatening to run for president and never does. And one of my theories about why he does is that he has absolutely no sense of humor. They showed him one time recently in I think when roast for Obama or a presidential with the dinner with the News Corps and the guy, someone was making fun of Donald Trump, who was sitting in the audience with a poker face couldn't laugh for a second. And in general, so I think you're right. It's healthy. It's a way to, and there's a lot of research also that shows that there are connections between humor and kind of creative thinking, divergent thinking. There are a lot of benefits to humor.
There's been a number of articles on creative people in advertising, in the sciences, that these are environments that you really want to foster a lot of. Comedy, and one of the other ones, going back to what I was talking about, that there's studies that indicate that humor is very good when there's moderate levels of conflicts between groups, because it becomes an escape valve. Colin Quinn had a summer TV show, and Colin Quinn's from New York, and he had one bit where you have 5 comics of different ethnic groups sitting in front of a Brooklyn brownstone. And they'll do the jokes of the contemporary news, but they'll also razz each other. And it was very reminiscent to me where some of the tensions between ethnic and racial groups in New York could be dealt with jokes up to a limit. And you had to know very carefully before you got punched in the face. That was, somebody else said you'd insult their ethnic group or their religious group or their racial group, and they'd come right back and take you out. And then it was one-upmanship, doing the dozens with each other, but you had to know that limit when you went too far.
Interesting. Other questions?
What was the motive of your presentation? Was it to teach us on the boundaries of humor and the work, or was it just pure curiosity?
It actually got me interested in taking a look at the research in the area of humor, because I had indicated that I was a bit standoffish in the sense of trying to analyze humor, that it might be strangling it. And then as I got into it, I thought some of the research was very interesting. And from my own personal experience, the issue of learning to discover the boundaries that might exist in a workplace in terms of what will be viewed as humorous, what you can say. And that was the focus that I wanted to bring to it, that in the workplace, you have to be aware that you may have a tremendous response to your supervisor who can be snippy with you, but be very careful with that great joke to come back, because there's a sense of there are boundaries. I can insult you, I can be self-depreciating because I already know I'm in a position of authority, but if you're self-depreciating, well, you've just confirmed you're a loser to me, so I can step on you even further. So there's much more complexity predicated upon the research that I've seen. So it was a bit tedious to go, a standard academic presentation, here's this paper, here's this paper. But I thought it would be a lead-in to think about the greater complexity that might exist in the workplace.
I've been thinking about, I work with people on the autism spectrum, and I do a support group for them. And these are all people who are working and things like that. The biggest issue they have is understanding humor in the workplace. So we have these conversations month after month about, there's one man, he doesn't know when not to joke. And so he's always offending somebody, but a lot of them, they don't get the jokes. And then you try to explain the jokes to them, and it's like translating culture to somebody else. And I think it's such a huge part of the workplace. They don't have trouble with understanding the tasks they need to do, or having the abilities. It's the social aspect and the mind reading. So what you just said about people knowing when to stop, it's all about theory of mind, or mind reading.
Which, as we've been speaking, brings up two thoughts that I would like to throw out. Is humor singularly human?
No.
I've seen a clip of 2 dolphins basically torturing a penguin. Not a penguin, a pelican. The poor pelican's sitting on a post in San Francisco Bay, and one of the dolphins will do that, walking on the tail, catch the pelican's attention, and the other one sneaks up and pulls one feather out of his tail. The pelican turns around, and the one who's pulled the feather out does the same thing while his buddy does it, and you actually can see them, in effect, laughing. The other question is, I'm not familiar with a AI program that recognizes jokes. Watson beats the world champions at Jeopardy, but do we have, I haven't checked it out yet, an artificial intelligence software package that recognizes a joke? I'm sure you can easily build one that would write jokes, but does it recognize jokes in the context of a natural language context? So, read these 5 pages. Tell me if anything is funny in it.
All right. Well, and your comment brings to mind the distinction between jokes and spontaneous humor, and a lot of people think that, or people that have researched this think that make the case, and I agree that spontaneous humor is a higher form of humor than jokes, because jokes are typically things that you've heard from somebody else. You weren't the producer, you're just delivering. They're typically recycled over and over. Whereas spontaneous humor, has to work in a particular context. You're creating it on the at the moment, and it's much in that sense. It's much more creative, and I think David.
It's wit.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I thank you all so much for sharing your ideas with us and for the great questions, and hope to see you in our next event.
Thank you.
Thank you.